I'm Paul Carr.
And I'm Sarah Lacy.
And welcome to a long-awaited return to Why Is This News? It's been 6 months since we've been both in the same place and actually managed to get a show together. Where the hell have you been?
I've been in Indonesia.
Why?
Again.
Why on earth? Have you not done it once? I mean, you've already... Jesus. Why were you in Indonesia?
This trip was a little different than other trips I've gone on. It wasn't really a reporting trip. I was actually there to be a speaker for the State Department. Ooh. And I spent 2 weeks. Americans will be happy to know that they work people very hard.
Good. You were earning your money.
They definitely squeezed every last drop of work out of me.
Good. As a non-American but person who pays taxes here, I am glad to hear that.
I know. It's a big value. I worked every day. I don't think I had a single day off, and went to about 5 different islands, 7 different cities, and did about 200 keynotes / sort of government meetings and presentations. Ridiculous.
Wow.
Anyway, the point was about entrepreneurship, though, which is, when Obama went to Indonesia in November, the 2 things that came out of it that are sort of priorities for our embassy there are ecology, because Indonesia has some of the most amazing natural resources, but is the 4th largest emitter of greenhouse gases, has horrible deforestation, coral bombing, lots of environmental
We should just say, just because it's an interesting thing that I can never get tired of hearing about Indonesia, just explain again the scale of Indonesia, like the number of people.
Well, let me just say, the other thing is entrepreneurship, because 50% of the country is under the age of 25.
Right.
And so there's a massive need for jobs.
Got
and
it.
The government can't create all those jobs. It's going to take private sector to do it. And they need to really develop that. So, back to your question, scale of Indonesia.
Because it's huge. And every time
4th largest country in the world by population. And it's a nation united by water.
Part of the reason I asked as well is because every time you come back from Indonesia, I'm always fascinated by all the stuff that I should know about Indonesia but don't. And it was, you wrote a post on your own blog on saralacy.com that was talking about how there are numerous reasons why perhaps, unlike, say, China or India or other places, there aren't quite so many ambassadors here going around talking about Indonesia. But equally, there isn't the sort of the other side of it. There isn't the brain drain of people leaving. And why?
I mean, it's this issue of, when I first started working on this book and was hearing about Indonesia, I was just like, how have I not heard more about Indonesia?
Right, exactly.
Like, it's going to be one of the 7 biggest economies in the world in the next 40 years. 4th largest country by population. We never hear anything about it. And I just kind of was like, why is that happening? Yeah. And, I think I got my sort of clearest answer on this trip, which is Indonesians don't come. Yeah, they don't come to the U.S. Yeah. Or if they do come to the U.S., they go back.
Right.
And so it's this. And so one of the reasons we hear so much about India. I mean, I think China is a unique phenomenon. I think India in particular, though, and Israel too. Yeah. The reasons that the Valley is so obsessed with them and has put so much money into them is because there have been so many really successful entrepreneurs here who've kind of worked as informal ambassadors.
Right.
For the country.
Who come here, succeed, and then talk up constantly the opportunities at the place they don't live anymore.
Right. And you see this all the time with countries. I mean, the countries that tend to get spikes in foreign investment, especially when it comes to venture capital, are, they're not necessarily countries with the biggest demographics. They're countries where there's some connection. There's some personal reason someone wants to go. There's something there that pulls someone to it. And Indonesia sort of hasn't had that. And so one of the reasons why I discovered is because people who come to the United States for school almost always go back.
Yeah.
So most of the people so there's no brain drain.
Yeah.
So
why do they always go back? Is this because Indonesia's better? Because it sounds like it's plagued by natural disasters and that you can't fly directly between 2 islands. These are problems that natural disasters notwithstanding. I mean, you can get from an island to another island here. So why would you go back?
To be fair, you can't get from like Jakarta to anywhere.
I'm just saying. But that's like saying in America, you have to always fly through like New York to get to anywhere. It's like
I'm sure there are cities in the U.S. without direct flights.
That's true.
Say Memphis and San Francisco, my hometown, and where I live now. But
that is annoying.
Anyway, I don't have to fly to Jakarta, but.
So that's something. So again, why go to Indonesia?
At any rate, no. So the reality is, the bulk of the people who go to the United States for education are children of the wealthiest families in Indonesia, and we're talking about like heirs to like palm oil, tobacco, huge industries. And so those are the people who can afford to send their kids to the United States. They come to the United States, but they're coming here to get groomed for, in Western ways of business. And then the expectation, the contract, is that they will go back and run the family-owned business. So you have this whole generation of kids who've been coming and studying in America, falling in love with America, and under any other country would stay. And then eventually they get the call of, and they all refer to it as the call, where they're like, okay, you've had your fun, now it's time to come back. And so you have
the Manchurian candidate thing of like, is that John? It's time to come back to Indonesia.
So you have this whole weird thing in the country where all these people who in another country would have stayed in the United States and done startups and moved to Silicon Valley or moved to New York or moved to LA, moved back because of family obligation. And so there's this question of like, is that a good thing or a bad thing for the country, which I kind of argue both sides of it in the post. I mean, I think in short, you obviously have less people that are building a bridge with Indonesia business-wise, which is a huge short-term negative. But you also have the smartest U.S. educated people all going back to Indonesia, and they're frustrated because they have to run these family businesses, so they're investing in and starting other things. Right. They're working with each other. So there's a lot of innovative things that are starting to take root among these people. So, I mean, I'm curious your take as a foreigner.
Well, it's funny. So my take is I had last night, in fact, I was hanging out with some Brits who have relocated here, and so one of them was a guy who runs a sort of software as a service company. Another guy is a guy who's like a CTO of a startup, and and then there was another person who just flown over and just moved, just literally just come over here to sort of like find his fortune, and every single one of the group was all like, if I can get a visa, if I can do it, if I can convince America to let me, I'm never going back.
A lot of these kids feel that way too. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I spoke at was a dinner of about 200 or so of these alums in Surabaya. Yeah. And I meet these kids all the time, and they all are like, I wish I could have stayed in the U.S. I mean, they don't make any bones about it. But the difference is, kind of, they went back and Indonesians, as I wrote about with the woman post earlier in Women Entrepreneur post last weekend, they have an amazing ability to just suck stuff up and do it.
Right, and I guess that's the difference, because to me, and I've said this a few times, where entrepreneurs have said to me, I would move my company to the US, but I can't get a visa. Like, what would you recommend? And I'm like, well, I'd recommend not to call yourself an entrepreneur if you can't solve this fucking problem, because that's what I would recommend, because cab drivers can solve it. That's I guess is the attitude, and I think that's the attitude of a lot of people in Britain. It is a problem to be solved. It's to figure out how to, especially if you're in tech, and there are lots of industries where America isn't the answer, but certainly in tech, and you see it in entertainment and movies and other things, which is like this idea of breaking America, of getting into America, because it's the biggest market, a biggest English-speaking market. It's a benchmark for success.
Well, if you're a small country, yes.
Right. If you're, I mean,
to me, if you're in Indonesia, the market isn't selling to America.
No, but Indonesia, America doesn't speak the same language. I'm saying if you're it's a natural place to gravitate towards. If you want to get English speaking success, this is the place to get it. But there is no reason, there is no pull, most entrepreneurs in the UK have no family commitments like that. Most are first, or in a lot of cases, they're first generation entrepreneurs. They're people whose parents had normal jobs, and or they don't give a shit. There's a sense of there isn't that same pull. There isn't that. It's pretty millennial, really. It's that idea of like you don't necessarily care what your parents did. Like, you're in it for yourself.
I think what's so interesting about this generation in Indonesia is these people want to be entrepreneurs and they're frustrated. So it's like they have the same situation where they're kind of misfits and trying to solve something by constraints. And they have sort of I think this is the generation that has the potential to make a lot of change in Indonesia. Like, there's a couple of these guys that are behind a really exciting online payment company called Indomag, which is the single biggest problem in the Indonesian web, because the telecoms there don't really provide a viable way, which has been the solution in China and India and other emerging markets. So this is the biggest problem, and you have these heirs of these huge families that are getting together to solve it. So. I think there's something really interesting and really unique from other emerging markets.
Well, I mean, you had an amazing quote in your blog post where you were saying basically the State Department doesn't worry as much about granting Indonesian visas because they never overstay.
So there's an 85% approval rate
on getting visas.
And it used to be 90% for student visas. Because they don't overstay.
Because it's going way down in every other.
Right, whereas in
India,
country, they said it's almost impossible because Indians always want to stay in the United States.
Yeah, I would imagine Brits probably shouldn't give student visas.
But I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
An 85% approval rate. I mean, that speaks to this isn't just an anecdotal thing.
Right, that's
the
point. That proves what you're saying. Like that's because the government has no incentive at all to issue visas to people who are going to overstay. And so if they're saying openly it's fine, then it's like that's way encouraging for.
Right. So, do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing for the economy and entrepreneurship?
I think it's a good thing for. It's a tricky one because I think for the Indonesian economy, it's a good thing. I mean, it must be a good thing that the best and brightest are getting American educations, then coming back and continuing to build. Like if they feel
long term, short term, there's a cost to it.
Yeah, short term there is, but it's like it's Tim Robbins in Shawshank Redemption building a library. He's stuck there. He may as well make the place good. Like I think maybe a group of Indonesian kids are all Tim Robbins, apart from the rape in the back room. But the metaphor only stretches so far, essentially, is what I'm saying. I think for America, it's, I guess it's good. There is a disincentive. You don't necessarily want, and we always get shit on TechCrunch comments about, like, oh, Indians are coming over and taking all the jobs.
There's a million studies that show that immigrants create more jobs.
I was going to say,
and that's certainly been the case in Silicon Valley.
I'm a London liberal. My view is the more immigrants, the better. But at the same time, there is a compelling argument for control, it's self-controlled immigration.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily pro or con, great for America, bad for America. I think there's sort of enough.
But I think for Indonesia, it's great.
I mean, my point is for Indonesia.
So I think it's great, but I wonder if, from what you're saying, there is already that sort of murmuring of dissatisfaction. I wonder what happens with the next generation. Whether this generation clearly has this familial loyalty and is like, when your parents call, blah blah blah. But we've talked about millennials before. And I wonder if Indonesia has a next generation which turns out to be a bit like America's current generation of millennials, if you have kids who are like, they come here and they're like, fuck what mum and dad say, like I'm here now. Like it does seem to rely on a lot of loyalty to family.
But I mean, it's like I've said before, what I think makes Indonesia so unique of the huge population emerging markets, is they're the only one that doesn't have a lot of big multinationals, and they're the only ones that don't have a lot of venture capital. I mean, there's, as far as I know, basically 3 venture capital funds who are doing any sort of investment in Indonesia, none of which are headquartered there. And, by the same token, you don't have, I mean, Google's now coming into the country pretty aggressively, but other than that, like, that's pretty much it. Yahoo's been there somewhat in a deal-making capacity, but it's like, it's such this virgin territory and market that, and the entrepreneurship is so pure because it's not getting these spikes from, big incomes getting inflated from multinationals or people getting venture buyouts and thinking they're in the valley and doing crazy things. And so the people building companies there really love to build companies. And it's like, to me, it's another indication of like, Indonesia has the potential for a disastrous short term in entrepreneurship, but a great long term because it's not for whatever reason, defeatist or not, it's not taking any of these shortcuts that countries like India and China and to a degree Brazil are.
It does seem like this raw thing that's like, almost an undiscovered, like, so you can find a tribe in the middle of like the rainforest, and like, how did we not know about these people? Like, they've been living this way all this time. It's somehow this country that's one of the largest countries in the world has managed to achieve this and like everyone should be paying attention to it just to see what happens.